Welcome to tonight's study session, June 19th, 2023. City Council reports. Councilor Rosati?
No.
Councilor Seymour?
Along with many other people, I attended the opening of Civic Academy, week one. Full class on that. 19 people, I think one dropped out, so that was, appreciate the opportunity to sit in front of them. They were a little quiet first, and then the questions wouldn't stop, so that was great.
We
So,
jumped into our judge and attorney's time.
That's it. So that was it for last week. Thank you.
Councilor Emmons?
I also attended the Civic Academy. That was good. Lots of good questions had come in. And then the North Metro Arts Alliance, they're just gearing up towards a bunch of events this summer, partnering with the city with Arts Week coming up in September. And then they'll be doing a fundraiser at Westy Beer Fest. So they'll be selling the pretzel necklaces for donations. That was my idea. So. But yeah, so they'll be there at the end of July at the Beer Fest. So those are the biggest things that they're working on with the city. So.
Cool. Councilor Baker?
Nope.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I did not, and I let them know, didn't go to inclusivity because I joined the folks at the kickoff for the Civic Academy. Thanks to staff on that. It's always fun. I know it's a lot of work for them. And then for anybody who's listening tonight, or any of you who want to join, Policy and Pilsner is tomorrow night, 6:30, Coca-Cola Beer Company. Join us and have a pint and some pizza if you want. So that's it for me.
Councilor Namella?
It's been pretty quiet since I just got back from vacation, so.
Welcome home. I have a couple of things we have to deal with. CML starts Sunday, and we need to pick a representative that will go and vote for us for the election of the board and everything. So I'm not sure who's all going.
I'll be out of town.
Mayor Pro Tem and Councilor Marmella.
And I'm
Which
going,
day
so
is that?
Tuesday is the vote in the afternoon.
Okay. In the afternoon. I had planned to be there Monday and Tuesday. So if you, yeah, I mean, just tell me where to go, and we'll go.
I don't know. They will have it in the agenda, but you have to be there by a certain time. You have to sign in, and then you have the votes for us, and usually whoever's there, we convene and figure out who we're gonna vote for, and you cast a vote. If you're gonna be the one.
Knock yourself out.
Okay, so Sarah's gonna do that. And, Mayor, I always call you Mayor, City Manager, we need somebody to call CML and let them know, Sarah, no.
Will do, Mayor.
Thank you. Saturday's open house, and we have signed up for that as a council and said we would be there from 10 to 2. And so I need to know, I teach from 10 to 12, so I can be there from 12 to 2 as soon as my class is over. I'll race over, but who's here the rest of the day? All day, part of the day?
All day.
Most of it,
Okay, at least in the morning?
yeah.
Okay, that's what I was worried about, is at least somebody's in the morning.
4:10.
Okay.
Well, I can do the morning.
Okay,
I'll be there.
okay, perfect.
And I can do the morning, but not afternoon.
Okay. And then, looking ahead at our council's calendar of what we're doing, I have June 27th as telephone town hall
Yes.
at 7 PM.
Was that the day I'm doing that?
June 27th?
Mm-hmm.
It's not on the calendar.
I thought it was July.
It may be July.
It's July,
I
I
think it's
think.
July.
Yeah,
I got it, I just asked Kit to send me the whole thing before he left, and that's what it says. So I'm
yeah,
it's
double,
July.
I had
I'm double
July.
checking.
Yeah.
I had July.
I did too, so.
Yeah, it's the Thursday, because that's usually when we do those. Yeah.
So July?
Yes, July.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. All right. And then we don't have anything until, we have 2 things in August, but I just asked him to, we had like 80 things hit our calendars, but nothing said this is a council event. So before he left, I asked him to send that to me, and that's the only one that I had mixed up on, so, perfect. Yeah, the Civic Academy, the people putting that together and the staff that will be doing that the next week's fantastic, great class, ask great questions. How was your part, Mr. Franco?
I thought it went well. We
Yeah.
had some good questions from the audience and participants, so yes,
They were very energetic and
they
participatory.
were definitely engaged.
Yeah, so it was good. Another note for me personally, I just don't want anybody to hear fourth hand, sixth hand. I was diagnosed with breast cancer last Tuesday, after having some biopsies, and we don't know anything at this point in time. As soon as we do, I'll give you the plan, but prayers are welcome. So with that, what's up?
All right, thank you, Mayor. And so if we could go to the next slide for some updates, next slide. So some things that we'd like to share with everybody. First of all, new business open in our downtown Westminster, and that's Inks and Drinks, opened up on Friday, June 9th. And that's on the southwest corner of the Aspire building, so that would be kind of across the street from Alamo.
Do
And
you write there and with your ink, or what? What do you do with the ink?
It's drawing, writing, et cetera, whatever,
Gotcha.
right? Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, there we go. So creative space dedicated to creating projects including painting, terrariums, macrame, string art, et cetera. So artistic kind of theme. And then there's more information if you want to visit their website there to the right. Emerald Ash Borer update. We've got a lot of city trees that are in the rights of way around the community, and so we've completed our inventory. We know what's out there, but we've sent letters to residents who have an ash tree that might be in the right of way, and if it meets the treatment criteria, which is essentially it can be treated and survived as opposed to it's too far gone, there's a free one-time treatment on behalf of the city. The city has grant funding to assist in that program, and so we'll then keep track of treating that tree. Essentially, you get a injection into the trunk of the tree, and then every 2 years you get another one until the blight is gone. But you can drive all around the city, and you're going to see the damage that's already occurred in the dying trees. So it's just part of our reality at this point. Yes, Counselor?
Okay, do the residents have a different option? Rather than treating the tree, can they ask for it to be removed and they plant a different tree?
I don't know. Let me follow up on that, Counselor. It's a good question, but we really haven't talked about removing trees, just treating trees at this point. But, if there are ones that
Because
are...
as you said, treating trees is no end in sight
Mhm.
choice.
That's correct. That's correct. And so, if you want to learn more about the Emerald Ash Borer, there's our city website /Emerald Ash Borer. And again, it's gonna hit the community like a ton of bricks. I think our count was 65,000 ash trees in the city. That's a lot of trees that are gonna die unless they're treated. So, next slide. Westy Winds. So the Teen Police Academy occurred between departments here in Westminster and Arvada. It was a joint teen academy, which I think is a testament to the cooperative efforts that we've got going on with Arvada. Wrapped up this past Friday. 16 students participated in this program. School resource officers, police personnel, and other city staff were the ones who provided the training. And you can see a picture to the upper right. The library, I just wanted to remind everybody that, we've got the summer reading program, and that goes from the 1st of June to the end of July. We've got 2,100 people signed up. Not too late to sign up if you want to and participate. And so city website /library/events registration /summer reading. And then a good news story, and Counselor Emmons, thanks for sharing this with me, but great news story for Westminster. We've got a young fifth grade student pictured to the right there from Sheridan Green Elementary, competed at both the National History Bee and the International Geography Bee. His name is James Waldron, and competed out there in Virginia, Arlington, Virginia, earlier this month. He was a quarterfinalist in both competitions, and so we just want to collectively say congratulations to James and certainly his proud parents. But the other one that I've asked the staff to research, I understand we have a student who went to the National Spelling Bee that lives in Westminster, a young lady, and so we'll get some more information on that and provide an update to the council. But, folks showcasing Westminster at the national level, awesome. Next slide. Some things to know, community meeting on CDBG, that's the 2023 annual action planning. It's going to be Tuesday, June 20th, 6 to 7:30 at the Eaton Street Apartments Community Room. And we'll be talking with the council about that effort moving forward this evening. Special Permits and License Board, Wednesday, June 21st, 7 to 8:30 p.m., right here in council chambers. Neighborhood Nights, Friday, June 23rd, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. That's in historic Westminster, Fireman Park. And that's just been a huge success across the community. Nicely attended and very, very positive feedback. Public Safety Open House, that's what the mayor was talking about earlier this evening. It's Saturday, June 24th, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. We encourage folks to come out to the Public Safety Center and meet our public safety officials. And then next city council meeting is Monday, June 26th, 6:30 p.m. right here. So lots of things coming up in the next week. Next slide. Information only items. We have our 2023 state legislative session, end of session update. It was an information item for the council. John Presner's here and could answer any questions that you may have, but if the information paper suffice, then we'll move on. Next slide. And as always, encourage folks to contact us at the City of Westminster. You can call my office at 303-658-2006. Email me directly at mfreitag@cityofwestminster.us. You can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, check us out on Instagram, or ring our bell at Nextdoor. And as always, we want to be accessible, responsive, transparent, and accountable. And pending any questions, that's all I have this evening.
See no questions. Thank you. That brings us to presentation of a concept plan for property located at 8835 Lowell Boulevard, also known as Alpine Vista. This is a concept plan review. Its purpose is to allow city council to learn about the proposed project and provide feedback to the applicant on this council's general impressions of the proposal. To begin this concept plan review, city staff will provide a brief introduction, and then the applicant or its representative will present an overview of the applicant's development proposal. The council may then ask questions of the applicant and provide the applicant feedback on the proposal. City council comments on this proposal are gratuitous in nature and are not binding on the council, the planning commission, city staff, or the applicant.
Okay, we're going to pitch it over to Planning Director John McConnell. Go ahead, John.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, City Councilors. John McConnell, Interim Planning Manager, here with you tonight. We'll be helping to facilitate the very first concept plan review with you. And we do ask that you please reserve any questions that you have till after the staff and the applicant's presentation. Next slide, please. I believe that Mayor McNally addressed the information that's in this slide, so we can move on to slide 3. All right. The project is located at the northwest corner of 88th Avenue and Lowell Boulevard. The concept includes lots 15, 16, and Tract F of the Alpine Vista subdivision. Next slide, please. The project, the project is located on the northwest corner of 88th Avenue and Lowell. I apologize. I got ahead of myself there.
Can we go back?
No, thank you. This is the right slide. I'm just on the wrong script, so I apologize about that. Lots 15 and 16 are both Zone B1 Business District. Tract F is Zone PUD and is a part of the PDP for the Alpine Vista Townhomes. It's also known as Skyline Greens, and serves as a detention pond for the townhomes and the commercial properties. Lots 15 and 16 are designated as commercial in the comp plan, and Tract F is designated as medium-density residential as it's part of the PDP for Skyline Greens. Next slide, please. The proposed development includes the removal of the existing parking lots and commercial building. On the northern lot, Lot 15, the applicant proposes 4 single-family attached dwelling units. On the middle lot, Lot 16, the applicant proposes 16 single-family attached dwelling units for a total of 20 units. The existing detention pond on Tract F is planned to remain. The proposed units are shown as 2 stories in a townhome style. Next slide, please. The applicant provided a site plan that is shown on this slide with their pre-application submittal. On Lot 15, you can see the 4 proposed units facing onto Lowell Boulevard with parking in the rear. On Lot 16, you can see the 16 proposed units fronting onto the surrounding streets with parking lot in the middle and in the rear. Tract F is not shown on this site plan. Next slide, please. Here you can see the single-family attached architectural renderings that were provided with the pre-application submittal. Next slide, please. Notice was provided for the concept plan review tonight. The applicant posted 3 signs on the property and mailed over 1,700 notice letters. The notice was also posted in the Westminster window. All required notifications took place on or before June 8th of 2023. For the applicant to pursue development of the property, they would need to process 4 development applications, a comp plan amendment, a rezoning, a PDP, and an ODP. So this concludes the staff's presentation, and I'll turn this over to the applicant. The applicant will present you with the concept plan.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, first of all, thanks for having us and for using us as a guinea pig of sorts for your concept plan review. We're happy to be here. I'm okay with the title slide. I don't need it to advance anywhere for me. I'm going to be brief. I'm here on behalf of Urban Cottages, which is one of our companies, not the same as the Uplands. Different partners, different partnership, but what we do is we do market rate workforce housing. That's really what we focus on around the metro. A lot of it looks like this: 2-story, 2 to 3 bedroom cottages, townhomes, and duplexes. And so when we bought this property 2 years ago, we were concerned when it came up for sale after it had been vacant for 2 years on what would happen here. We thought there was a lot of uses that we did not want here, and so we set forth on what we could do here. I'm sure that some of you are frustrated as our senior management with what many would call an eyesore on this property. And I'll describe our problem. The problem is not that the building cannot be renovated or rehabilitated. The problem is there's no commercial demand for that rehabilitated space that makes the rehabilitation financially feasible. The only demand we've received is from the nonprofit world, which has been substantial. We've had a lot of discussions. But it's tough to put those finances together on this in particular this renovation. So we decided after a year plus of that to try to pursue housing, given the acute need in the area. And so we enlisted a company that was very familiar to us, the lead company in terms of modular workforce housing in the state. They're out of Buena Vista, and Eric will introduce himself and the company here shortly. But it was perfect for what we were trying to accomplish, workforce housing on this site. Take a site that was not currently very productive and get 20 workforce townhomes. What is workforce housing? It's something that we're really steering towards that is typically 100 to 180 to 120% of the area median income. We would be looking to do this on a market rate basis. I'll go ahead and address that in advance. It's a really tough site for us to do affordable on. When I say affordable, I mean permanently deed restricted affordable for something that is 68%, 80% AMI or lower. And we approached Maker Housing on this site. The challenge is, it's a very small site. In order to get scale of what they need to do, we would need to go somewhere between 3 and 5 stories in this location. A very quick survey of staff, management, and our neighbors indicated that was a no-go. And what we were trying to really do is emulate the housing around us as best we could. Missing middle housing that just was produced 20 to 40 years ago. And so that's how we backed up into this concept. It would be market rate. However, we have approached the school district, including the public charter school across the way at 86th and Federal. And there are 4 boundary schools within walking distance of this site. They desperately need housing for their staff, in particular administrative staff. They're having a heck of a time hiring folks without having them driving 2 hours a day in total commute. So we are working on 3 to 4 units for those schools at a price that works for them, obviously less than market, with the only limiter being that we can't rent it for less than our cost. And so they're very enthused. They'd like to be a part of this review and approval process if and when it gets going, but we didn't feel like we needed the parade of thousands this evening. With that, I'd really like to give it to our experts who are going to run through these slides, but before I do that, I would like to hand it over to Eric Schaefer of Fading West Development.
Jeff, thank you. Real quickly, a background on Fading West. We came into existence about 6 or 7 years ago out in Buena Vista, and really with the goal of tackling the affordable housing issue in the state. And so we started first as developers. We had 22 acres just south of the high school in Buena Vista. That really our goal was kind of what Jeff was talking about, 80 to 120 or 130 AMI is what we were trying to hit. The problems are what you hear over and over again with lack of subs and GCs and frankly quality. So we started first shipping in fully volumetric modular boxes from plants in Nebraska. If you're not familiar with that terminology, it's about an 85, maybe 90% done home that's shipped on the back of a semi and set onto a foundation, all the same codes as any house that any of us live in. We realized quickly that this was just not a problem in Buena Vista, but a statewide problem. So during COVID, we were funded, built a $25 million factory, about 110,000 square feet. That has now been open about 20 months. Mark and you guys came out, Jody came out a couple months ago maybe to see it. There was a team from Westminster. I live up in Broomfield, so it was fun having all of you out there to see our factory. And then we now have about 175 affordable homes literally right across the street from the factory in Buena Vista. So a project like this really is our sweet spot. We are building throughout the state. We have kind of a high-profile project going on right now in Breckenridge, 60 apartments. We can also build apartments that is being shipped to Breckenridge as we speak, and later this summer in Vail and Uray. So we're kind of all over the place, again, with affordable housing kind of between I would say 10 and 50 homes is our sweet spot. It takes us about 10 days to build a home. So our factory is set up like think a Toyota car factory, building Corollas and Camrys, except we're building 2 and 3 bedroom homes. Most of what you see behind us is from the farm in Buena Vista. The exteriors of the homes, lots of flexibility on those. Interiors, not so much. Part of how we do this is radical reduction of waste. These homes are very tight. We're in the midst of getting Energy Star ratings on them, using heat pumps, so all electric, like I said. So these are really well-built homes. We use engineered lumber, so they're incredibly precise, probably more precise again than a lot of the stick-built stuff that we see around the state. And what we have been doing, I'm Chief Business Officer, has been partnering with folks around the state, with municipalities like Summit County, as I mentioned, Vail, Eagle County. We're doing 20 homes for them. And then a bunch in the southwest corner of the state, and Telluride and Norwood and Ridgeway and Uray. And really one of our hopes, and we were sharing this with Mark when he came out, is to have a pilot project here in the Front Range. And a project like this really is our sweet spot. These are fourplexes or fiveplexes, and you can see behind us, we make them all the time. This would be a fantastic partnership that we would like to take on with Jeff and with all of you. It's going to take all of us to kind of solve these problems together. And again, everybody here is invited out to Buena Vista. We are an open book. We would let you walk the factory and see exactly how we're doing things. And again, it's all about value engineering, high quality, architecturally interesting, but the speed to the market and a little reduction in the cost is kind of what we're hanging our hat on.
Before I hand it over to Todd, I will add one thing that I forgot to note in my notes, or note to you from my notes, is that, why are we here? Why are we here for your first concept plan review? It's because there's no neat box inside your current code that we fit in, frankly. We're trying hard to meet the T-MUN standards, and that's why Rob from EV Studios is here, and Todd is here to talk about really anything you'd like to talk about, engineering, planning-wise. But that's why we're here. We are going to need some flexibility, and that's why we wanted some top-down advice and counsel from this council. That's why, and with that, I'll let Todd actually go through the slides finally.
All right, thank you. Todd Johnson, Urban Cottages as well. I'm just going to go quickly through the site here and then, as Jeff mentioned, get to the crux of the matter that we have in front of us. So what you have is the site that really is challenged today. We have some overhead power lines. Part of your policy is that those really need to be taken down and buried. That creates a pretty large burden on the property itself. We have some roads that cut through. It's kind of a remainder parcel, if you think about that. And if you think about infill sites, you have a lot of what you'd maybe say baggage that comes along with infill sites that you really get challenged with. And the point that Jeff was making is really true. If you go back through your code, it's very difficult to fit into the any of the boxes that you have. But we think that there is a solution. We definitely think that the processes that you have in place allow flexibility, and we think we can get there. And we think that rather than having a site that is distressed and run down and is not performing for the city or us at the end of the day, there's a better answer there for this. And so I'll just quickly go through these slides. If we can go to the next one, please. You'll see that this site really progressed, from the Safeway site that was there back in '75. This was a extension of that facility, and then things grew up around it. The Safeway went away. Townhomes were platted for this entire area, and then pieces started to get taken off of that, while all at the same time, this building stayed there and stayed in place. If you go to the next slide then, if you could. What we get into is a context that we feel really does fit into the neighborhood. If you go through and you take a look at the hard numbers and you go through code and you get down to exactly what you can and can't do with the numbers, that tells you a different story than what's out there. And some of the burdens, like I say, that we have on the site is right-of-ways have already been dedicated. Other amenities are in the area already. And so you get into a situation where you're really trying to compare product at the end of the day and what's out there in that built environment compared to the other product that's there, and then work through the numbers kind of back into the situation if you want to think about it from that perspective. Again, an infill site really does take some special out of the box thinking when you go through this and take a look at it. And what you see on this slide is really an articulation of the different densities that are around us. So you have skyline greens, and again, that entire area was platted as townhomes. That came back as a duplex or paired product, which they actually were able to get a higher density on there, about 10 DUs to the acre. The townhomes that are there, about 12. To the north, you're getting about 12 as well in that area. And then you're getting about 4 to 5 roughly in Shaw Heights directly to the east of us. And what you see in there is actually not only single-family detached, but you also see paired homes within this edge too. And you see up and down Lowell, you see more of a residential setting that does occur. So this commercial that's there, as we've talked about, it just doesn't function within this area. and really the trend of commercial moving forward, it's a very difficult site from that perspective. You have other commercial areas that are going to be well-positioned when Uplands comes in, that should, create some more growth within those and strengthening of those other commercial areas and also within Uplands. Where this site really does, and where you see this a lot in a lot of communities, is some of these older areas that are infill are really transitioning back into residential to help support and buttress the other commercial that is there. So again, we think that this is a perfect fit into this neighborhood for this. We really think the product, the density that's there, really is needed to help support some of the hardships that we do have on the site from that side. And if you go to the next slide, please. This is the site plan that you did see in the overall perspective. We have about 20 units. We are providing off-street parking, and you do have some additional on-street parking that's associated to the west side of this. North is actually pointing to the right side of this diagram here, or exhibit. You have green space that's around these units, but you don't see traditional pocket parks. You don't see very large areas. If we actually went through and did a PLD calculation for this project, it actually exceeds the acreage that we have for development. So we get into this catch-22, if you can believe it, that, we actually have a larger dedication from that perspective than we do, the number of units. And that's just, again, it's just a function of the code, and this one just not fitting in exactly to the boxes that are there. Your code is really set up for newer developments a lot of times, and infill sites really do take a special need there to help work in the flexibility of the context of the built environment that we have there. So what I can tell you is that we have worked with staff very closely on this. We've gone back and forth on a couple iterations of this. We've talked through, we understand the criteria, they understand the criteria, of course, much better than us. And so you get into, as I mentioned, you get a PLD requirement that is pretty burdensome for the property. What I would tell you from the engineering side is there are no real engineering problems that we have on the site. With the adjacent roadways that we have, you have infrastructure that's there, so you have water and sewer. We don't find that as a challenge on the property. You will get into a planning perspective where you're getting, setbacks that you may traditionally see a little larger. These would need a little more work on that from that perspective, but we think that they're in scale with the buildings that are being proposed here. And so again, with this site, we think the scale and the setbacks are more complementary to that compared to what you would see on other traditional sites. So I think one of the first questions that we all need to really understand is starting off with the zoning side of it and the use on the site. This is commercial, this is business. Also in the comp plan, it is zoned for those uses as well. So obviously we have to get out of, that business or commercial side of it and get back into a residential setting. So that's one of the initial questions that is the nexus of where we would have to start from. We understand the process of going through and doing that rezone and going through the comp plan amendment. We've done that many times. We've gone through PDPs. We work very closely with staff on PDPs and ODPs, so we don't see that as a hurdle from that perspective. But again, I think the initial question is, do we see this as residential, right? And then how do we work together? Do you like the plan that we have? Do you like the concept that we have here today? Because then we can really launch into working together with the staff to come up with a solution that really works for both of us. So with that, that was the high-level analysis. What I would do is I'd love to hear your feedback on it. We're all here for that. And if you have any questions, we're here for that as well.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you for joining us tonight. I have two things, and I don't know if the first one is really a staff question or if you're really even to that point. But what this does to that spot for what's allocated to water is always going to be first question. So I don't know if we're to the point that we know how this impacts versus what's there today.
Yeah, that's, we anticipated this question, as you might imagine. A couple slides before this slide will be right there. Thank you. That's okay. You had it perfect right there. I should have described it better. So there was 108 townhomes originally planned for this Safeway Center. And you could see that 16 in the red were actually built. When the 72 units got the other townhome, Skyline Greens, the remake of Alpine Vista, when they were built, only 72 were built. That really leaves 108 originally platted townhomes. That's why we arrived at 20 units, because like for like, that is the exact same water allocation. And that water was allocated at that time.
Great, thank you. The other thing that I'm curious about, so you talked about AMI, so what does that mean in actual cost a unit? So like, what's market rate for one of these units when you go to sell?
We would love to know, because, we would love to know what it would be today and then like in the future, but we would have lost a lot of money betting on that during the pendency of the Uplands approval. But what I can point to is Adams County does a pretty good job of publishing what a 2 and 3 bedroom would rent for if they were at 100 and 120% and 80% AMI. And that is a great guide. Purposefully didn't distribute that because it's an independent source. I can follow back up with management and make sure that that gets distributed to everybody, and anybody that's watching, you guys can put that out there. But that's really the best guide, and that goes up and down depending on area median incomes.
That makes sense. The only other question I have, I before this came up, I've done some research on these kind of prefabbed homes. It's pretty neat. I know there's a Yes Communities and they're in Centennial that it does this kind of stuff. So, very cool concept. What I'm curious around with like the energy efficiency, is there any like thought or work towards, doing like solar as part of the building of these and that kind of stuff? I know that in the past, and this has been, a couple of years ago, I think it's when they were talking about, what's the other property that's off Federal that we talk so much about? What's that?
Holly Park?
Yeah, Holly Park. The group that brought that in, or the developer who conceptually had talked about that, that was like one of the selling points, was that they were gonna be, ahead of it, so that people weren't thinking about adding that later down the road. So I'm just curious how that might fold into this with energy efficiency, trying to keep them affordable, so that's, not an afterthought.
It's tough, right? It's a direct push-pull, right? It costs a lot more upfront, so it's really hard to control the costs. What we've done in the past is, we like the idea of exploring all-electric homes. We're involved in some of that right now, in some other jurisdictions. And some of those are solar-ready, but they're not solar paneled, and sometimes that's a happy medium, but we'll explore all that. It takes beefing up some joists and a little bit different method of construction. And so part of it is, with them, I love how he put it, the exterior we can do some work on. The rest of it's it is what it is. It's like Ford, it's, the choice, you can have any color you want as long as it's black. To some extent, there is that reality, and we're gonna have to look at truss systems.
Okay, yeah, I was curious about that because of the way they're manufactured, so, I guess the only feedback I have for you is, same thing you've probably heard from me before, you've attended enough of our meetings, like, we need a good amount of diverse, different types of housing, and you hit that, so, at least conceptually, it looks very interesting to me as far as what the needs of the community are.
I will say we build all our homes to climate zone 7 and the highest wind loads too, since we're building at so many high elevation places. And the Norwood homes and these Breck apartments, we are putting solar ready in, and then they'll finish them out on site. So that's something that can be easily added if you guys choose to go that route.
Yeah, we're in the middle
That's not a problem.
of a project just like that.
Okay, cool, I have no other questions, thank you.
Councilor Miller?
One, and overall, I think residential fits well onto this site, and I understand the constraints on the retail viability, so, I think in general, the product type, or the scale of the product fits with many of the products around it. Can you clarify, is this rental or ownership?
We don't quite know yet. I'll be honest with you, we'd really love to receive what's called the Transformational Housing Loan Program. And it's part of the state's efforts to fund these exact projects that are they're over 80% AMI. And so it would be incredible, but I don't want to count on it. And it's an 18 to 24-month process. It's through the Department of Local Affairs, through the Office of Housing, Finance, and Sustainability. We're talking directly with the director. It's a little small for the threshold, but it still meets it. And so, you know, we're really active in exploring that. That would require it to be rental. It would also require it to be rented in that AMI window, I think under 120, for 10 years, for as long as the term of the loan. Those are the details we know so far. But the challenging part is, without knowing that, we can't commit to certain things. That's a really piece of important funding for us, to be able to do that. So I believe they're going to be rental. I think that this $75 million pot of money that was allocated for this exact use is gonna go quickly. But I think everybody that's involved at the state level has told me they believe that it's going to be replenished. So we have reason to believe that if we are not in this first round of funding for workforce housing, then we would possibly be in later funding. And you'd have to be 100% rental to do that. You couldn't have a mixed ownership community. But that's where we are today in terms of for sale versus for rent. I would say that the only conversations we've had so far have been for rent, given the target demographic is where we're trying to hit.
I'd really love to see them ownership, because we just don't have this kind of price point in an ownership level. So it's disappointing to hear.
How would that, might I ask, how would that work in terms of like targeting it to, you know, the workforce, which we're all ears, by the way, on a for sale solution. Especially on this scale, we could try something, right? On 20, homes, we could really try something. But I'm just curious on how mechanically or logistically that would work to give us some guidance to go back to the lab, so to speak.
Well, I think you'd have to, the other comment I have is just on the site plan. I don't really, that's graphically what you're showing in the conceptual images, show a little more open space. You have parking lots, and which kind of show that you're thinking rental. If you were to change the orientation of some of these units and get these into an alley configuration, you could still have parking spots behind them, even if it's just one parking spot. I'm actually working on a similar project ownership where we're doing the units where they have parking in the back of them, and then over time somebody could build a garage and add value, but you kind of sell it at that lower level. So one, I'd rather see an alley configuration anyway to better match the context, the surrounding site context. But two, if you had that access, even if it's just one parking space, and you could probably configure this so that you can get some other, little bit more parking somewhere else. Then it would set it up for ownership, at least to have one space dedicated on a parcel. So that's just one element. I don't necessarily know what exactly you're asking for regarding otherwise the ownership
Would it be
component.
like restricted? I mean, if it was market rate, most of what Fading West has done has been market rate targeted workforce. That's all we've done on the for sale side is just market rate targeted workforce, targeted towards workforce. Things like, you pointed it out, no garage up front. Things that we can try to, by size and feature, really target that for sale unit.
Yeah.
If that's the goal, then I think we can at least explore that. Where we get to some trouble is if we're trying to sell to a particular list, right, and qualification that, much like how subsidized rentals work, we've seen some complications. We have some friends that are in the business, some of them, that are doing business inside and outside this jurisdiction. They've had a lot of tough times making that work, meaning a affordable
Deed
for
restricted
sale.
at 120.
Deed restricted for sale.
I'm definitely working on that piece too. I've talked to other cities where they're going from, they're deed restricting 7 years, 15 years. Boulder does a permanent deed restriction. But in this case, I don't know if you need to, if you can, if you can set the price to get your workforce goal, right? Because of how tight the unit is, the small site, not having a garage, I think you can get it to a level where it's cheaper than a lot of what we have out there. And, not deed restricted, because you'd probably be a little bit above 120% at the sale.
Given interest rates and where it is, it's tough to hit on a forced sales side. But no, I understand you. I understand your comments. That's very helpful.
And then just a couple of other questions. One for staff. I'm just curious, do we need to keep 88th Court?
We asked the same question. There's some utilities within that roadway, and so there was a need to maintain that roadway.
Just keep the public easement?
That's
and
my
then-
understanding
Um,
from our engineering division.
May I add, Mayor, with the pre-concept review, so staff has not really gone through this material in much depth. Tonight's really the applicant's night to get a read from city council on what your thoughts are. If it goes to the next step, we would then do a pre-application review, at which point we would really delve in to the details. Things like water also, we would report back to you on. But for tonight, this is really the applicant's time at the table. We have done some pre-work, so the team has done a very good job integrating with staff, but I just want to qualify that the staff has not yet been able to go through the details like we would at the next step.
Okay.
But I think your questions are good, so they know what to
Yes.
think.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I think, you might have a better site plan if you could get rid of 88th Court. Seems a little redundant. And then if you can't fit an alley with parking off of it into sort of that north-south, that would be, I think, the best way to do this, to run an alley back there, and that would set you up better for ownership. If you can't do that, I mean, I think, and if you end up doing rental, you could almost take, if you keep 88th Court, you could reconfigure those homes to be running north-south and to have the parking lot in the back, because I don't love how the homes on the west side of this block are facing onto a parking lot. I just feel like there's a little bit more you can be doing to make a better setting for this, whether it's ownership or rental.
Well, just to clarify though, the front doors actually face onto the street.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
But the front doors of the homes that are existing face onto a parking lot now. And the site plan can be better. You
Yep.
can go another round with that, and I'm sure the staff will get you there. Sorry, I'm just going through would love for them to be wired for solar, but I get the constraints on the structure. I think that was it, yeah, so.
I would note, we have looked at some other site plans, in fact, with staff. Challenge becomes a yield problem, you yield a lot fewer, and the site constraints are still the same, like some of the fixed costs, like underlying the power lines, and there's some things we haven't talked about that are associated with this that need to be finished out, but we will look at what you gave us, the guidance you gave us in terms of layout difference, in terms of an alley running north-south and having those units. So you would prefer to see units facing Lowell Way and Lowell Boulevard and an alley in between.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I really would.
yeah, got it, understood, just wanted to clarify that. And we'll look at, the impact on yield and all this, we're all trying to row the same direction.
I feel like you could get more, and I'm not, these homes are small, they're not gonna take up a ton of water usage, so I just feel like, get the right site plan, get the right integration into the area, and if it's like a couple more units, then it's just like, I think it's nominal with these.
And these would be an average of 1,150 square feet, gentlemen?
Yep, that's about right.
Between the 3 and the 2 bedroom, to answer your size
Yeah.
assumption. But yeah, 1,150 between the two, so a little bit bigger on the 3 bedrooms and then a little bit smaller than that, obviously, than the 2 bedrooms.
Yeah, I'm excited for this pilot, by the way. I've seen you guys, so I'm.
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Counselor Seymour?
Thank you. I have no problem with the product type, and then you'll have to work out the layout on that. I do have concern and would bring up concerns of anything less than 2 parking spots per unit. So I think we're about 5 short if my eyes are not
You
giving
are
out.
on site, meaning off-street.
Correct.
You are correct.
Okay,
Is that correct,
Yeah,
Rob? And,
that's
Ted?
correct.
yeah.
We're still like, we're 33 maybe
Yep.
off-street? Yeah,
Okay,
Point
that's my
taken.
concern.
yep.
Counselor Zadi?
So, we know we have a housing crisis, right? And what I love about this project, so I agree with everything that everyone has said so far, but just to tell you what I love about this, you have a site that you said in the beginning, the numbers don't work, right? And otherwise, this wouldn't be used for residential, it would be basically a useless space for us. But you got creative, and what we know about the housing crisis is we need to figure out how to make building cheaper and faster, right? So I love how creative you've gotten with modular workforce housing, right? Because you're using the economies of scale to make the construction cost cheaper. And that's the kind of creativity I think we need across the spectrum to get get this crisis taken care of. So I wanted to thank you for that. I think it's a great concept. It's a great need, and like you said, those schools, those nearby schools, that's going to be a great boost for them. I'm curious why 3 to 4 units when you said 3 to 4 units, you mean
Of the 20.
of the 20? Okay.
Yeah, and the thinking behind that is we don't know what our end yield is gonna be yet, so it's tough for me to say if we can stretch to 4. But we are stretching everything on this project to see if we can provide as much as we can to them. We started there with this site, figuring out what the teachers and admin really needed. They really need housing. So that's the flex I'm looking for. And I can't say that it'll be X% of AMI. What I can tell you is I will bring both the Westminster Public Schools folks and the public charter, Crown Point, in, and they can tell you that we are working in earnest on a formula that works for them.
Yeah, and even if it's market rate for workforce housing, which is still theoretically lower than what they would otherwise be paying for in single family. And it's scalable and rapidly deployable, right? So this is gonna be a faster, so what's the timeline estimated for getting something like this, since it's pre-built?
Mark and I are betting a chocolate chip cookie. Not kidding, we're not betting anything. But we believe that it is doable in a year. We believe that this is employable in 12 months.
And
I'd
that's
like
the
to-
big value, isn't it? Like that.
Exactly. I'd like to challenge everybody because that reduces all kinds of costs for us. And we can make some decisions here. Better layout, some things that people are partial to. But 3 or 4 years is tough. You know, it's really tough because it just keeps grinding on. So if we can get this done in a year with you all, we think he can produce the units. We can have a built product that we're all out there looking at in 18 months. That would be our goal.
Great, thank you.
Counselor Baker?
You said you couldn't follow our current rules because you can't deliver the parking spaces and you
No.
can't deliver the land for open space?
It's more about the land for the open space, I think.
Well, don't you just do cash in lieu?
The cash in lieu is for a calculation that would be bigger than our site. And the cash also sort of wrecks the economics. So that's one of the things we're flagging up front is that we may need to pursue some alternatives. The code is set up the way it is. It's set up on population, as you well know. And so the calculation just in this case makes it both financially infeasible and then literally impossible from a physical dedication.
Yeah, and there's others. There's, setbacks from Lowell, the other adjacent roadways. When you start to take in a traditional site and those standards, it really eats up the entire site from that perspective, and it makes it impractical. So that's where we have to get outside that box and say this is not, traditional, single-family detached, new development. This is actually an infill site, and how do we work on those setbacks? How do we work on those open space requirements, PLD, all those types of things?
I guess I'm confused. If you do cash in lieu of, you're not dedicating any land.
On that particular point, correct.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Okay, so you're saying that the cash you would have to deliver up doesn't make the economics of the project work?
We're not saying that zero cash wouldn't
Yep.
work. Counselor Baker, we're trying to get some flexibility as how much that would be. According to the formula today, it would be
So
very
you want a
challenging.
discount from that formula?
Yes,
from the-
exactly right.
And then I couldn't help but notice, how many cars are parked on Lowell Way?
In this photograph, it looks to be approximately maybe 10.
A dozen, yeah. And these are cars that belong to the, 16 units directly west?
One would
The
presume.
logical assumption.
Yeah, we would not know, yeah.
It could have been during construction too, because what you don't see on this graphic is actual construction going on with Skyline Greens at the same time.
And was that site to the west granted an exemption? See, because when we have parking for single-family homes, we have two-car garages, which then leaves two off-street parking spaces. Okay, and we don't even have two parking spaces here.
To off-street dedicated, we're short of the
Right.
40.
Much less the, if we had 40 spaces in garages and 40 spaces in driveways, we wouldn't have to worry about parking on the street.
Well, one of the ways
But
in which other.
if we're only have 33 parking spaces, aren't we
Right.
condemning the people who live there to argue with their neighbors about parking?
Well, it's a subjective view, but I understand your point. One of the things other jurisdictions do is they look at the size of and number of fixtures. And so a lot of those are 3-bedroom units, where a preponderance of the units in that site plan are 2-bedroom units. That sometimes does change parking equations for people. There are different standards that people apply to a 2-bedroom versus a 3-bedroom unit versus the assumption on number of cars owned. So that would make a difference in this case, because all the units, you're describing the 16 units to the west of this image are all, I believe, 3-bedroom units. I could be wrong on that, but I think they're a preponderance of 3-bedroom.
That would be good to know. And I had heard that there's a concern about contamination, because I guess when this was the entire site was a Safeway shopping center, they had a dry cleaner there?
Yeah, not on this exact site. It would be to the west and the south of this site.
Correct.
So this site tested clean, but the site that hasn't been built yet, if you notice some of those homes in Skyline Green, some of those have not been built. They've been processing that for a number of years.
The other way, sorry.
Keep going
There you go.
right there. And those 14 homes right there, not all of that is affected, but a portion of that, yes. A portion of those were exactly where the dry cleaners was.
And so if it's contained underground, what was the problem with building on top?
It wasn't that they were going to be accessing their drinking water from under the ground. It was a state DEP standard, and I believe they've successfully resolved it. They had to keep testing until they got a certain reading, and I believe they were now within the safe. But I couldn't attest to that. That's not our property.
And you said this was a whole subdivision zone for 108 townhomes. Why weren't the townhomes built here?
Well, I wouldn't know. They were, I think, platted in 1999. So it's been a few years. I just don't know. Went through a couple of recessions. Now you can see that Skyline Greens came back in and built almost all of them out, less the 20 we're discussing.
And if you met the current city standards without special waivers, you could only build 10 homes there, and you couldn't generate enough revenue from those 10 homes to make them marketable.
Yeah, I don't even know if 10 is 10 the right.
I don't even know
number?
if 10 would be the right number, frankly.
So it could be only 8 homes could be built there.
Correct.
And you couldn't have that much markup in those 8 homes.
They're no longer workforce housing at that point.
Well, for me, looking at the problems of parking and land dedication, I'd have to have much stronger justification to waiver you from the rules that everyone else has to follow.
Yeah, and I think on the parking side, I can add a little more context to that. We're doing parking analysis not only in Westminster, but actually across the metro area and across the state. And the parking numbers are coming down, we see every single year. So the demographics that are, you know, the number of people within homes and number of people within families is coming down. The number of cars that are actually being used by a family is coming down. We don't have 4 or 5 cars like we did, you know, 20 years ago. We have 1 or 2, and maybe even in that situation, we might Uber half the time. So we can definitely provide you additional backup on that number. And when we also see this very similar to, it goes back to what Jeff was saying, it really does get to a bedroom count. And the demographic that will live within these units, because it gets very similar to an apartment complex. I've done other projects in Westminster here where we've gotten parking down to about 1 to 1.2 per unit or per bedroom that we've seen in apartment types projects. So you start to compare all these elements, and we start to provide additional backup and supporting documentation. We can definitely help support that discussion for you when we do come back in. I've got that note down, and we'll definitely help us, you know, provide a little more detail on that.
But 1 to 1.2 parking spaces per bedroom or a 3-bedroom unit is 3 to 3.6 parking spaces, right?
Well, and in the apartment side of it, it was an overall context too, and it was also looking at that one may not have been that particular one wasn't close
It's
to
one
any.
bedrooms, probably.
Yeah, it wasn't even close to transportation either. So those are all factors that we start to take into a consideration.
Well,
So.
this is a couple miles away from any kind of infrastructure. The closest grocery store is at 104th and Federal.
Yep.
Okay.
Or 84th and Zoom.
And basically, none of these units have any private open space, do they? They do not have backyards.
No, there's no backyards.
Everything is really communal here, and everything's gonna have to be taken care of through the self-governing agreements of the HOA.
Right, if it were a rental situation, we would be managing that ourselves, right? So that those common spaces would be managed like in any other rental situation.
Thank you so much.
Before we go to second round of people wanting to talk, Counselor Emmons, do you have anything?
Not much more to add. I mean, I understand the value of having this project. It seems like it fits. But my concerns are of Counselor Seymour's with parking. And I don't know with these, and I may have missed it when I was taking copious notes, but for the items on here that look to be platted for future homes or future developments, and this isn't probably for you, but more for staff, my concern is that if we move forward with what can fit the 108, is what are we doing with the other parts that are platted? Or what I don't want to have happen is us get into an out of kilter, off balance. If this gets approved, then that means that those can't be platted for anything else. So then what do we do with that land as far as what's been pre-planned in the first place? So that would be my concern moving forward with this. I understand its purpose. I appreciate what we're trying to do here, but just looking at the context in itself in its initial form, it just looks, and I understand that we need to balance it with what makes sense. It just seems like we're trying to get a whole lot into not a whole lot of space. And so that would be my only concern, is that I don't want it to get lost, that we can meet this now, but what does that look like 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road when we have this space that was already planned for a housing build out? So that's my concern.
My thoughts are, I too was hoping for sale. I'm not married to that, but that's my first pick in these kind of projects that we really do need. I do like the project. I like the homes. I had a question. One of the pictures showed a porch with 4 houses connected with the same porch. But then I saw other pictures where each home had its own individual porch. So if something happened, thinking it was a for sale home, that they could fix it. But I didn't know how, if it was a for sale home, how they would fix something that's attached to 4 homes. But then, yeah, that picture.
Yep.
And then go back to your site plan on page 6. Is that 6? That corner on Lowell and 88 that isn't in the yellow lines, you own that?
We do not own that. We have a very tight relationship with the owner, Mr. Carrillo, which you've heard from before when we've been through in our uplands approvals. And so we are actively looking at some alternatives for that site. On what right now it's doing well as a corner store. We have a different vision for the ultimate, what that can be for the community and a better community serving real estate. That could involve, there's a dearth of grocery stores in the area. Someone mentioned, I think Councilor Baker mentioned that grocery stores are tough to come by, especially walkable grocery stores. So we've seen some models around the country that we really like that are small grocers. There's some other models that we're exploring with him, but we're through our nonprofit and through our profit work, we're seeing some pretty fantastic possibilities for that corner. So to be determined. I'm excited about
I
it.
just saw that carved out and thought I needed to ask.
Yeah.
And to staff, I think when we have any of these infills, whether it's a shopping center turned into something else or whatever, I just believe we need to learn to be flexible and look at reality and not hold some things sacred for the sake of being sacred. I agree with Counselor Namella. If you could use alleys or whatever to get it to ownership and with parking, that would be great. But I applaud you for thinking outside the box and coming to us. Okay, now we have second round. You have one more thing?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I've seen a lot of things with rent to own. What does that look like in this?
It's something we're looking at right now, actually. It gets a little complicated because do you put the whole complex up from transition from lease to ownership? So it's not something that's been done a lot, but we're intrigued as well. And then maybe that's a elegant way to transition from rental to ownership at some point. One of the challenges I will bring up to we've heard the for sale preference a couple times now. One of the challenges is construction defect liability and our ability to sell these units without getting sued. And he's very the builder sitting next to me is very familiar with this concept, and they want to avoid that as well. You avoid that by renting it for a certain amount of time, and so there are models out there where you rent it really to ensure that the manufacturer is not going to be sued, and then you could pursue ownership thereafter. But there's a lot of ways we could go. Right now, I would say that we're going to take some of these conversations back and go back to the lab and see what that looks like. It would be our preference if we could switch from rent to own either way and not to have it look any different. And so that's something we're going to go back and work on.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I just wanted to add support around the parking. I think that it's a challenge I'm sure you're aware of, but if you reconfigure it too much and take those parking lots away, people are gonna be on the streets, and that obviously those other townhomes don't have that same amount of parking available that you're providing in this site plan. So, I do think like even just looking easy at like reconfiguration about where front porch, if you flipped them and went to Lowell Boulevard versus, or whatever that is, so there's ways to do it, but I just wanted to put support behind being careful about the balance of parking. Yeah.
Counselor Namella?
I'll be the odd person out with not caring about parking because the market will set it. You won't you won't put in, as little parking in there that you won't be able to get these things rented or sold. But, for parking, it would be helpful if you are looking for, a really tight configuration to have some, if you have other products out there or other very similar scale units, because, our parking standards are set for larger units. And so if you can find some projects that are demonstrably
Yep.
the same scale. We don't have a ton of transit in this area. I can't remember if we must have a bus on 88.
86th and Federal.
Huh?
Yeah, Federal.
Yep.
So it's not too far away, but anyway. The only thing I was gonna say was, the PLD, just bigger picture, we've been running into this for quite a while with infill, with multifamily, and just where we are overall with development in the city. We're not greenfield developing anymore, and I'd really be interested in, just in a bigger picture with staff looking at what is the appropriate PLD? What do we actually need? Is it arguable? Is there a true nexus with the PLD that we currently have and what we're spending it on, what we're creating? But in the meantime, when I look at this project and needing to have a smaller amount of PLD, if it does go rental, do we look at some length of period where it is deed restricted, so we're getting something out of the deal, even if it's deed restricted, we could kind of have a better understanding, as Mayor Pro Tem wanted, of what AMIs are appropriate. I know this rental area per square foot is probably lower than other areas in the city. But that would be something to maybe balance in with that package, if you're looking to get less. And I'll just say, this could be a really interesting product too for our 92nd and Lowell Southwest corner, which we own, that's been sitting there, and I drive past it every Monday for the past bazillion years. That's a small site, and it needs something. Just saying. Okay, thanks.
Noted.
You reminded me of something, and this is to staff. As I looked at the green that is here, can we start giving people credit for thinking outside the box and making things more zero-scape, instead of we're hammering everybody to get rid of lawns, and yet we keep having the same rules and regulations for what people have to have, that we're asking everybody else to just dig up. And so that's my frustration, is when are we going to cut bait and start with what at least we have left, and what we start infilling to do it the correct way. So that's just my last word. And with that, as stated at the outset of this concept plan review, counselor comments are gratuitous and do not bind or obligate the applicant, city staff, the planning commission, or city council to any course of action or future decision. And I will now close the concept plan portion of the meeting, and can't thank you enough for coming by and being our test case.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Quiet zones.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem, councilors, we're gonna talk quiet zones, specifically at West 72nd Avenue, and so I'm gonna turn it over to, Community Development, Director Dave Downing, who will start us out. So Dave, you got the con.
Very good. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Staff is here tonight to seek your concurrence with our recommendation on the specific method of establishing a quiet zone at the 72nd Avenue crossing of the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad track. We have a short presentation, and we would appreciate if you could hold your questions until the end. Next slide, please. There are 9 at-grade crossings of this railroad track in Westminster, including the 112th Avenue crossing that is actually shared with the city and county of Broomfield. Quiet zones have previously been accomplished at that 112th Avenue crossing and the 88th Avenue crossing. Currently, staff is working toward the establishment of quiet zones at Lowell Boulevard, 72nd Avenue, and Bradburn Boulevard, all three of which must be constructed concurrently due to their proximity to each other. Tonight, we're going to focus on the design of the 72nd Avenue crossing. We will issue an informational-only staff report pertaining to the status of the remaining 4 crossings later this summer, just in case council would desire that information for future budgetary considerations. As noted on this slide, quiet zones are not inexpensive. Next slide. This slide simply confirms that there are several governmental agencies and private entities that weigh in on the establishment of a quiet zone. Now, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Senior Engineer Aaron Kirshner, the city's project manager on this particular project, to walk you through the 2 construction options for the 72nd Avenue crossing. Next slide.
There are 2 ways that we can establish quiet zones at West 72nd Avenue. The first option we have is known as a supplemental safety measure, or an SSM. These are also known as standard safety measures, and essentially are a set of pre-approved improvements that, once completed, establish permanent quiet zones. And then by permanent, staff wanted to note that it is not revocable under current regulation. The second option that we have is known as an alternate safety measure, and essentially this covers everything else that doesn't fall within the criteria that's established as a standard safety measure. Once these are established, they are potentially revocable under special circumstances, and each one of these ASMs is approved on a case-by-case basis by the FRA. Next slide. Currently, due to the atypical layout of West 72nd Avenue, with 72nd Way and Newton Street being so close to the crossing, there's only one option for us to establish an SSM, or permanent quiet zone, at this crossing. This would require the installation of 4 railroad gates, and once completed would establish a permanent crossing. This is currently being contested by BNSF. They don't want to install additional equipment that they would then have to maintain, unless they absolutely have to. This process is anticipated to take 37 months to establish the actual quiet zone and silence the train horns. And the benefit to going this route is that it would establish a permanent quiet zone. The cons to this route is that it has a higher upfront cost and it has a longer time to establishment, which comes with its own cost implications. Next slide. The other option we have at this crossing is the alternate safety measure. This can be potentially revoked under those special circumstances once established. It would only require 2 railroad gates, similar to what is currently in place now. This would require a submittal and approval by the FRA. This process is anticipated to take 19 months, or just over 1.5 years to complete. And if chosen, this option is anticipated to save the city $665,000 over the SSM option. The benefits to this option is that it takes roughly half the anticipated time to establish the quiet zone and the significant upfront cost savings. The con to this is that it can potentially be revoked under those special circumstances, and that nature of that also comes with its own cost implications for future. Next slide, please. The risks associated with ASM quiet zones are associated around incidents at the crossing. If there ever were to be an incident involving the railroad or any of the associated equipment, it could potentially trigger a review by the FRA. If that review resulted in a finding, then the FRA would notify the road authority, or in this case the city, of their findings. From the date of that notification, we would have 6 months to respond with the city's intent, and then an additional 3 years from our response to address that finding.
If either deadline is not met, or if the city is non-responsive to that notification, then the FRA could revoke the quiet zone status. This, again, comes with potential future cost implications if we ever have to address findings in that situation. Next slide. To better understand the associated risks of ASM quiet zones, staff looked at all of the quiet zones in the US. Currently, there are 319 established ASM quiet zones, and only 11 of those have been, or have lost quiet zone status and been revoked. In all of those cases, the reason cited for revocation was a failure to maintain the approved improvements, or simple failure to install the improvements that were approved in the first place. Staff considers both of these to be low risk to the city because we have a robust pavement and streets maintenance program, and this project currently has all of the funds that we anticipate needing to install. Next slide.
So thank you, Aaron. So with that, the choice here, staff believes, is pretty straightforward. We are recommending that the city proceed with the ASM approach. There is risk involved, and that is why we wanted to bring this issue to council to see if there was concern over the risk. But as Aaron stated, we think that is quite small. And so at this time, we'd invite any feedback from council.
Councilor Seymour.
Thank you for having us hold the questions, because you answered the key ones, especially that last side, is, what's the real risk? And so it sounds like just neglect as much as anything. So, yeah, I would be in favor of staff's recommendation.
Councilor Namella?
I have a couple of questions around just the quiet zone in general. I'm excited that we're pursuing it. But just, what would be the extent of the quiet zone on the tracks? Because I know we've had a lot of residents, interested in having their area be a quiet zone, particularly, down here. So what would it, is there a map of that? Or?
I think the easy reference answer I can give is that kind of lending to why these three have to be built at the same time is their terrain horns have to sound as they approach each crossing. So if they're within a quarter mile of each other, a quiet zone established at one effectively wouldn't make a quiet zone because they'd be sounding for the other crossings. So, the quarter mile is kind of the general rule of thumb. But it would silence all of the crossings that are in the city going up to, I believe, the next crossing that this community would hear is 76th Avenue. So, I can confirm if necessary, but I believe that it's when it hits that quarter mile approaching 76, depending on the speed, is when that horn again starts sounding.
Okay. And just kind of some practical questions about it. What speeds do the trains go through?
That I don't know offhand, I'd have to look into that.
At a good click. I know that from waking up at 2, 4, and 6. When it used to go through us, I miss it, but it doesn't honk anymore. Once in a while it does, but they can go, depending on what's happening, can go very slow, and if they're traveling, they're moving, so.
Mayor, if I may, I think I heard you say this, but I'll reinforce it. In all cases, the train engineer has the authority to overrule any kind of quiet zone if he senses an emergency, so that could happen.
Is that,
I like when I hear it once in a while.
have we had any experience with social crossing areas that are outside of the roads? I don't know.
Sorry, social crossing what?
You know how people have a social path that they create through parks that, outside of a sidewalk? Do we know if there's people
For an incident, or
crossing?
potential incident?
Just that, yeah, that's, yeah.
I don't think there's nothing obvious to us. Certainly, I think the potential is high that people cross, especially along that portion that parallels 72nd Way. I think that's quite possible, but we don't have any real evidence of social crossings.
Okay, last question is, if we go with the ASM, can it be scaled up to a standard crossing? So if we wouldn't be like having to
Start over.
start over.
Yeah, and one thing that staff looked at, and I had just gotten, after getting the memo submitted to council, feedback from BNSF that they are supportive of our layout, so that if we ever did have to go to an SSM, our anticipated cost of that would be some sidewalk to go around the gates, because the gates can't trap pedestrians between them to build the second set, and would be the BNSF cost associated with adding those second gates. So that's definitely included in what we've planned for the layout that was shown.
Okay, in that case, I think that makes sense to just do as, you know, the minimum.
I didn't understand when we were doing it back when, what it had to look like, and both at 88th and at 112th, when everything's red and everything's down, but there's no train in sight, you could pull and go through this way, and this person could pull and go through this way. This brings it like this, so that can't happen.
Yeah.
Counselor Baker?
Pictures would have been helpful.
Pictures of the
The
crossing
crossings.
layouts.
Of the crossing gates. I don't know what the difference between a four-arm crossing gate and a two-arm crossing gate is.
Yeah, go back a
Could we
couple.
go back, some slides, yeah.
Ne-
So
one
this
more,
is
there.
right here. So the picture shown here is the early sketch of what a four-gate layout would look like, and if you look, the red line work is showing what the gate orientation, or one gate orientation we're thinking of. If you look, you can see next to the red line work is the black, and those are kind of the existing that BNSF is hoping to keep. So the red gates are showing where the four-gate layout would be for that SSM, and then once you're.
So, well, the red gates you're talking about are not the vertical red lines, but they're the diagonal red lines?
Yeah,
With 316 other crossing zones with SSMs, a picture would have been really helpful. Okay. 8 years ago, when I was first on council, I was told that these were all approved and even the funding was done. Was that misinformation?
It must have been Counselor Baker. There's been no funding source. You probably noticed in the staff report, we were able to get a $800,000 grant from Denver Regional Council of Governments to help with this.
and that was in 2018.
Yeah, that was back from 2018, but no, sir, there's no funding.
So over the last 8 years, we've not put any money aside for this project, even though we've talked about it even previous to that.
That is correct.
Okay, and.
Dave, I do have previous council sessions. Originally, this was planned to be built in 2020. And we had adequate funding at that time to go into construction, but with everything that happened, we weren't able to go into construction. I think we even had an agenda item for a construction contract to get approved. That got put on hold both for COVID reasons and for FRA delays around the weird layout at 72nd. After that, as part of the budget we have now, I believe the 2021 planning session for 2022 budget is where we got our last source of funding approved. And I think that might be what you're recalling, Counselor Baker. And we haven't had to ask for additional funding since then. Things that have changed since then is that BNSF has offered cost shares that has brought our cost back down from what originally planned. And we have the option of additional cost share tied to the ASM layout that BNSF really wants, that comes with significant contribution from both BNSF and construction saving from the amount of work that we would have to complete to get the quiet zone establishment.
Well, the recollection was in 2014 that we were just waiting on the railroad because they had their own time schedule and we just had to wait on the railroad. but that's never here
Counselor
nor there.
Baker, I believe you're correct, but I think it was another crossing there.
Well, aren't we crossing at Lowell, at 72nd, at Bradburn, at 80, at 76th, at 80th, at 88th, at Wadsworth, and at 112th?
Those are all existing at-grade crossings on that list that you just named. 88th Avenue and 112th Avenue are designated quiet zones that have been established over the past 15 years, I would say. 88th was the first one we did. It was very inexpensive to do. We just had to do some median construction. And then 112th was the only other one where it's been established. We gave a $50,000 contribution to Broomfield, and they did the rest of the work to establish the quiet zone at 112th. And now these three are the next in line.
Okay, so this then doesn't include 76th or 80th,
That's correct. Or Pierce,
or like Wadsworth.
Pierce and Old Wadsworth, correct.
Yeah, Pierce, I forgot Pierce. Pierce is in there too.
Correct. It does not include, those are unfunded at this time, those four.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Mayor Pro Tem?
I just wanted to say that I'm supportive of what you're asking, but also I do appreciate that you're gonna bring back what are other opportunities, because for me, I would like us to start making a meaningful plan that says, hey, here's what it's gonna cost in today's dollars, and, you know, the next one we're gonna go after, so that we can, you know, bring equity to the other crossings.
Can do, we can do that.
Is there anybody that's against going forward
But it's how we go forward, do an ASM or an SSM.
with the ASM is what I'm hearing them suggest.
I'm against that.
Okay. Anyone else?
So we're good with the ASM.
ASM.
Good, okay, good to go. All right, super, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
That brings us to Community Development Block Grant.
Yes, and so my counselors will talk about this. We talked a little bit about the upcoming community session during the schedule of events presented during the city manager update. And so I'm going to invite in Economic Development Director Lindsay Kimball, who will run us through what this looks like moving forward. So,
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Councilors. Lindsay Kimball, your Economic Development Director, along with me, Molly Thayer, our Housing Coordinator. We're going to provide you with an update on the 2023 CDBG Annual Action Plan process tonight. As a bit of table setting, every year HUD requires the city to develop an annual action plan that's consistent with the 5-year CDBG Consolidated Plan. And we're currently in the 2020 to 2024 5-year planning period. Ensuring that we have a robust dialogue with the community and capturing their input is a very high priority for us. Molly's going to be discussing the ways that we are and we will be engaging with them. We do have to start somewhere though, and HUD provides rigorous guidelines for how we use the funds. Therefore, tonight you will also see a draft suggestion from staff on how the city may choose to program these funds. It's based on our past community feedback, partner input, and evaluation of the past performance of programs. I assure you, this is a draft plan and certainly adaptable over the course of the public comment period. We respectfully request that you hold your questions to the end of the presentation, and with that, I will turn it over to Molly.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and City Council members, and managers. Next slide. Thank you. As Lindsay laid out for us, the consolidated plan is built to cover 5 years of the investment and programming of our Community Development Block Grant. It's purposeful and it makes sense when you actually study it and spend time with it, because you wouldn't want to identify a program or a problem or an issue in your community and think you could knock that out in 1 year. So the 5 years is a pretty good runway, and it has proven across our city's use of the funds to covers some longer-term needs. Some of the programs that we've set out to do took us 2 to 3 years to be successful. And of course, we still have programs that are ongoing that we continue to fund and that our residents really appreciate. We have to follow the national objectives of HUD. I know many of you have heard this from me in the past. And those are listed for you on this slide. So the prime national objective is to benefit the low and moderate income persons of our community. Generally speaking, we're required to ensure that 70% of our resources do that work. It's where we go to work every day. We also may use our CDBG funds to aid in the prevention and elimination of slums and blight, but we don't have that as an active program in many of the entitlement cities anymore. It was pretty instrumental in the 80s and 90s when our urban core across America had a lot of slums and blight, and so it was built into the national objectives as HUD launched the community development block grants. The third national objective is to meet a need having a particular urgency. We recently dealt with that. We had CDBG CV funds in 2020 and 2021, and those were COVID funds to deal with the national pandemic. So from time to time, Congress authorizes the use of CDBG funds to deal with a disaster recovery or a critical need. Next slide. The consolidated plan in place is on our website, and I amended it this year, so it has some slight changes to it, if you want to take a look at that. But basically, it is the document that was put together with staff, community, and consultants in 2020, of course, a little bit hampered by our pandemic communications, to identify housing, community development, and priorities and goals of our low and moderate income residents. It was based on survey data, community meeting data, other economic data, and as Lindsay suggested, we also have some other past performance information from staff and our investors. And the new five-year plan takes off next year. We are fortunate in how our planning processes are dovetailing these days. We will be performing the housing needs assessment during the final 6 months of this year, and that'll give us some good foundational data to use as we look forward to what kind of programs do we want to implement in the next five-year plan. Next slide. The 2022 annual action plan that was brought to you literally on June 20th last year, so we are exactly 1 year out, had a recommendation for the use of our investment then. We are always allowed to take an administration fee off of the top of the block grant to help the city cover the costs of being an entitlement community. We may use up to 20% of our annual fund. We have programs that were kept going, further funded, and a new one that was implemented this year. The Emergency and Essential Home Repair Program, I believe, is familiar to all of you. I think many of you have talked with me about it. It helps our low and moderate income homeowners, people who live in their own homes, who earn less than 80% of the area median income, perform much needed maintenance, repairs, emergency conditional needs for their housing. We spend a lot of money helping rebuild and replace bathroom fixtures for people whose mobility is now challenged. We've put in ramps. Every year there is some water heater and furnace detail that is needed, and oftentimes insulation and storm windows, and we've had a couple of roof repairs due to fallen trees. Kind of an interesting issue. Housing Lift, listed under their second bullet, is the program we brought to the council in 2020 as an effort to do some preservation work around housing. The challenges we've all seen during the pandemic is that a lot of housing development has been slowed. We have our supply chain issues, we have cost issues. What I thought would be beneficial and what I heard from many of the operators of the affordable housing in our community is that they all were not holding back and carrying forward maintenance funding to really take care of long-term needs for their properties. So we have 2 projects that are in process today. You had an information-only memo on those in February. We spoke about them a couple of months back, and that is at East Bay Senior Housing, complete rehab for all the windows in one of their properties. And then the Westchester Apartments, formerly owned by Growing Home, now owned by Maker Housing Partners, is having significant rehab performed in the coming month and a half. We did also hold aside $100,000 from the 2022 AAP project in CDBG funds. And that was set aside for the Jefferson County Regional Housing Navigation Center. And I understand from my conversations with my colleague Kate Scarbeck that that has been delayed. So we still have the money in the bank, and we await further instruction. I have spoken with my cohort, my CDBG colleagues in Arvada, and they are ready to accept those funds in the event that we move forward with an IGA. And then there's the 73rd and Lowell change of use. We spent a big chunk of time last year on that. It came to us on June 20th. One of our residents in the Harris Park neighborhood brought forward the notion that a community event space would be a much better programmed use for the corner of 73rd and Lowell. And since that time, staff has done a pretty significant amount of work on it, but we're still not quite done. We had the official filing for the change of use throughout the close of the program year. We amended our con plan to allow us to set up a low, moderate area benefit that would be community events, community marketplace, that sort of activated market for that corner. So that was completed. We then went forward with a study, hired some of the analysts from the Leeds Business School to give us some data on what they thought a low moderate area marketplace could be and what kind of fees we would charge that would be reasonable, how we would find an operator to manage the site, ways to make it happen. And that recently came into our office. It's still being looked at by staff. We have had 2 landscape architects give us some really preliminary renderings for what we could do to landscape it. And then we went back to HUD with our work plan to change the use and heard from them that they wanted us to perform another environmental assessment on the site. So we are sitting on a piece of land that we have owned as a city for a little over 10 years, and it has 3 environmental reviews on it because every project that had been reviewed did not move forward. So it's very frustrating, and I know it probably tests all of your patience. It certainly has tested mine. But that is probably weeks away from being complete, and we will then be ready to meet with the community again, review some of these draft plans, and talk about the future. So that is the summary of 2022 and where we sit today from the investments made with those funds. Next slide. We are here, though, to talk about 2023. HUD has allocated to us $577,464. A little bit less than we've seen in the recent years. But we also have carryover. So I bring to you the perspective of 2 parts of budgeting to look at as we step into this planning. And as Lindsay stated, we also bring to you a very draft annual action plan. Basically took last year's annual action plan, stripped it, posted it, and said to the community, tell me what you think. You know, here's what we've got the money to do, here's where it's been programmed. What do you think? So right now we have, again, that 20% admin at $115,493. We allocate $180,000 to our emergency and essential home repair, and that's based on, we have 2 subcontractors who perform that work. One covers Adams County, one covers Jefferson County, and each of them have demonstrated that they can both do about $90,000 in projects each year. So that's about the volume of funding that they can work through. And then I was just swept the balance into Housing Lift because I have other applicants already in the door waiting for Housing Lift application to open up this fall. The current staff plan is to get through these 2 projects. They will be completed in August. Perform an internal debrief and evaluate the projects, make sure we have closed out on all of the performance bonding and all of the investments we need to see, and then make a determination about the future of that. We also have $290,000 in carryover. That money can be applied to the 73rd and Lowell project that I know we all care about and want to see happen. It could go to Housing Lift, or it could go to a new activity that may come up during this 30-day review with our residents. Next slide. So tonight, we bring you this overview, just kind of the high level, here's how it works, and a planned schedule. Tomorrow night, we're going to meet with the community, where we'll be at the Eaton Street Apartments at 6 p.m. We promoted that on Facebook, through social media, and through our not-for-profit partners, and an email blast. Then on the 22nd, we will begin working to incorporate all the input we gathered from our elected officials, our community leaders, and our neighbors, and we will work straight on through July 24th. So we are required by law to do 30 days. We usually do a little bit longer. I will run some ads in our print media as well to derive some traffic to the site and also hear back from some of the other neighborhood groups. Then at the end of this, on July 24th, we come back to you with the ordinance, the grant application materials, and the updated draft plan. It is a public hearing night for you in the community. And then we have a couple of weeks before it is all due to HUD, so we can make some final tweaks and fixes and get it ready to go. That is it from me, and I welcome any questions or discussion.
Tim?
Thank you for the presentation on the emergency home repair program. The dollars you allocated, how did we do last year as far as using all those funds that were allocated for that program?
Thank you very much for the question. During 2020 and 2021, the first 2 years of this consolidated plan, we had a lower amount allocated because of the work slowing and the closure. 2020, our maintenance people were not allowed to go to people's homes. So what we did was a massive piece of catch-up work. In 2020, I think we offered we had some leftover money from 2019. We offered each of our subcontractors $20,000. And then before that year was out, they ended up going through that money. So we took some of our other carryover money and moved it into the program. Staff increased the funding to both of those operators by $55,000 last year. Brothers Redevelopment, our Adams County partner, will be out of money at the end of this month.
And because really the spirit of my question is making sure there's enough in that, because it's a good program. I know I've asked in the past about potentially expanding that to other uses for folks that are in that demographic. Like one, and I don't know if this is even possible, but we talk about the problem with the trees all the time, and that potentially is going to become a problem for low-income folks. I know not for that particular reason. I think it was like a lightning strike. We had a citizen once upon a time who, we as a city said, now you got to pull that tree down, and it was, I don't remember what it was, but it was thousands of dollars, if not 10, to remove this huge tree. So I'd like to make sure that we're thinking of those kind of things and being as creative as we can with that portion of it, because to me, those are the kind of things that this money makes sense for. I certainly would like to see the 73rd thing get done. I understand if you see me frustrated over here, and I personally took a fair amount of beating for saying no to the housing there because I was concerned about environmental concerns that we were told were fine. So for them to come back and say, now go do another study, I find some amount of humor in it, but.
I'm not amused myself.
Yeah,
It's tiresome.
I use the term humor lightly.
I know.
But I am glad to hear that you continue to work on that, and if, obviously that's gonna take money once you actually get approval, so I wanna make sure that we're planning for that so that we actually get a green light, that we can then move as quickly as possible. Again, being quick is not really a thing anymore with it, but, otherwise, I think this looks good. I think I bring that up every year, making sure we have enough money in that bucket, just because, that's a good thing for people to be able to get that relief when they get into those situations.
If I may think with you for a moment, 2024 rather, consolidated planning process would be an absolutely brilliant time to look at, is $5,000 enough? Are there things we're missing? You know, really look at how we function with that program. Some of the assumptions that went into setting the dollar value on it years back and looking at other needs from our
Yeah, I
community.
mean, look at the cost of goods right now. I can't imagine a water heater
Yeah.
hasn't been like everything else, and it's probably 40–60% more than it was 2 years ago, so. But otherwise, thank you for the presentation. That's all the feedback I have.
Counselor Baker?
It's my understanding that the emergency and essential home, okay, of the repair takes another administrative fee?
It does. Each of the not-for-profit handyman programs that are subcontractors for that take a 10% fee.
Is there any way we can be more really thrifty about that? We're already taking a 20% administration fee. So if you take $1 and we take 20 cents out and turn the 70 cent, 80 cents of that dollar over to Brothers Redevelopment, they take another dime out. Aren't we only getting 70 cents of value from the dollar we were given?
I see what you're saying. No, it's a little bit different. The 20% that we hold back for our administration from city government comes off of the top of the allocation. So if you could go back, can you go back 2 slides? Yeah, thank you. So we start off with 577,464. We take 115,493 off, and actually, we don't even draw that funding down until we get some of our expenses on the books. And then we actually give 180,000 total out to our subcontractors to do the work, to run the program. They then take their admin fee out of the 180,000.
It would also be informative to see what the money was spent on, a recap.
Okay, happy to put that together.
And then, can we use this money for Green Court?
We have used CDBG money in the past to do infrastructure and streetscape projects. For those of you who have been tracking the work down in the Harris Park neighborhood, we did street lights and trees and a lot of improvements on Bradburn. We did a couple of small pocket park improvements that involved plantings and other art and atmospheric. We haven't done a major, we also did Hooker last year. We haven't done a major street installation, and it would require that we're working in a low moderate area, i.e. the neighborhood itself would need to have over 51% of the residents earning less than 80% of the area median income.
Well, I think you could do that with St. Mark's.
We'd be casting kind of a pretty big net for that, so I'm not sure. I can certainly look into it, but it would need to support either affordable housing or a low moderate area.
Well, it's being done to let St. Mark's have a safe way out of where they are, to make left turns.
Yeah, I could definitely run the census tract values for the area and see how much of it qualifies.
Because I would prefer to see that with both this year's allocation and with the carryover. I think that is exactly what the money's intended to serve.
It's a pretty hefty street project. I'm not,
Oh, it's $1.1 million or $1.3 million, so we're still coming up with the city a whole pot full of money besides this.
Yeah, and if I could, that particular census tract, so HUD looks at the tract level,
right.
and that geography is not considered a low to moderate income census tract for HUD. So it would be quite a lift to try and make a nexus on why a public roadway that would, ostensibly help the folks in that other neighborhood there, to the north. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name. North Park, thank you, to the north.
Yeah,
North
really,
Park.
North Park has absolutely no connection to Green Court whatsoever. It's completely isolated.
Yeah, it was our understanding that this would also help them make left-hand traffic movements and right-hand, because it would provide a connection to 96th, where there's a light.
Yeah, it goes from 97th to 96th, so it helps the people at St. Mark's and the environs. Doesn't do anything for the people in North Park. Absolutely nothing. Okay. Number two, I love the idea about the ash trees. I think Mayor Pro Tem, that's good insight. because there's a lot of people who have ash trees, and they're gonna be given a choice of, hey, one time will help us out, and then for the next indefinite period of time, you're stuck with it, which means what? 4 years later, they'll die and get emerald elm disease, or just help replace them now.
It's
Okay.
also good, it's a good.
I do
practical
not
suggestion.
like funding Adams County affordable housing. That should be a self-sustaining enterprise. And if it's not, they need to rethink that, but they shouldn't be relying on the city of Westminster, well, to cover their foolishness in maintenance of their properties. I do not like using the money that way at all. Is there any way we can basically dedicate some of the funds to repay ourselves for the costs we did on Knox Court?
We did talk about this during the Knox Court reparation and cleanup. And again, it would require that that property be programmed as affordable housing? Or
Well,
that we
it's helping the
created
moderate income neighborhood.
It is, but it would be for a specific housing, it would be for one home. Is that correct?
Right.
No, we just cleaned up and made the neighborhood decent and took the contamination out.
Right. And so it would, if we were going to use federal grant funding to repay ourselves for that, we would have to create a national benefit, and, you know, we would meet one of the national benefit requirements of HUD.
Okay, so, I mean, the short answer is no. Okay, that's fine. No is a fine answer.
Unless you wanted to make it into an affordable housing project.
Okay, those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Counselor Namella?
If you want to do that, I'm for it. Okay. Why didn't I put this into any order? I do like the idea of expanding what we could accomplish with the home repair program, and some of the things that I think we've also run up against in addition to trees is sometimes sidewalk repair, and just, I know we've done some some street improvements like you mentioned, but you know, these are areas where it's just difficult to have the streets look like they've been, you know, they're aging, and it's just more of a need in that area. I am a little dubious over, I wasn't here for the discussion on the 73rd and Lowell change of use into a market hall or a market, outdoor market space. I would prefer a more long-term solution to be put in place on that site. And I'm also kind of wondering how, you know, we have the market further down on 73rd that we're putting money into to potentially rehab as another kind of, you know, restaurant, retail space, potentially a market space. We had the food, the outdoor food market, I'm forgetting the name of it, that was down on.
Run Westy Run?
Yeah, that one. That didn't quite last. And so I'm just, you know, I'm really curious to see what what the Leeds Business School came up with, and just how viable that use is, and just how much money we'd have to kind of sink into that on an annual basis just to get it to live. Whereas putting money into something that's just, again, longer term, more finite. And so I'd be curious to know that, you know, we just completed the Harris Park Vision Plan not too long ago, and coupled with what the community has mentioned for, you know, uses that would be desired with the 30, and plus the 30-day outreach that you're gonna have here, I'd rather have an understanding of what's a viable and community desired use. And I really want to know who you're hearing from when you go out to do your outreach, you know, are we actually hearing from those community members that are part of the 51% or more of the lower and moderate incomes, or not, when we're talking about what the need is and what the desire is? The environmental assessment on the site, I'm just curious, for 73rd and Lowell, is it a phase 1 or phase 2, or what are they asking?
It's a complete EA, but we have an awful lot of documentation from doing phase ones twice in the past 6 years, so we've been able to repurpose a lot of the information that's already been gathered. The issue became, it was, all of the previous environmental reviews were performed on housing as the end use. I had some conversations with some people inside of HUD who didn't quite understand what the field officer for environmental review wanted to see, and they thought we had the highest and best environmental review on the planet from last year, 2 years ago, and so they thought, well, you should be good to go. And then as soon as we filed the change of use, you know, and changed the use from housing to a different national objective, they said, now you need a new environmental review. And
It would seem the residential analysis would be the most rigorous.
that's what I said. It is.
Okay. And then I'm assuming the money to pay for that comes out of our CDBG fund?
Yes.
Well, yeah, with the carryover, I think more of an injection into the home repair. And if we can identify a project that is consistent, again, with the vision plan, with what we hear from the community, what the need is in the community, I'd be open to hearing that, what that is. I don't want to say, yeah, like, what is it or not, so.
Thank you.
Anyone else? If you're looking for the market stuff, Nathan Mudd runs a ton of them in the city and around the area, and the Orchard has a wonderful farmer's market, so it's easy to find out how much they're charging, which they're pretty reasonable, having been at some of them, for a booth, and they always hook up with Miller Farms or whoever that can bring in the big produce for people to look at. I too, the ash tree thing is, with the worry about that, and a person on a single income or on a social security income that looks at $2,000 to cut down a tree or more, could be devastating. So I think that, and I agree with the home repair, I always like that, but we've got to get on this 73rd. Last time I was by it, the fence is there, but it's beginning to lean, and it just makes my blood boil every time I go past it, so we need to do something down there.
Agreed.
All right. Thank you very much for the feedback, questions, and input, and we'll be back July 24th after some community input. So at this point, Mayor, we're poised to move into executive session.
First, poll, if everybody's willing to go into executive session, because we're closing this meeting at 8:33. And we will do that to get permission to go into it, but then we're going to take a break and come back and be in executive session, because we have birthday cake to eat.
Bruce, no Baker, yes, and I will.
Lindsay Evans, yes.
Let's see more, yes.
Opie Zeddy, yes?
Nancy McNally, yes.
Sarah Nirmala, yes.
Dave Demott, yes.
It is 8:34,
And we
and
need to read the title.
Yeah, Mayor, if I
Oh,
could, just
go
for the
ahead.
record,
Go ahead.
for those listening remotely, the executive session that was agendized for this evening is to discuss the possible sale of city-owned property at Schoenberg Farm and to instruct the city's negotiators as authorized by Westminster Municipal Code 111.3C2 and 7 and Colorado Revised Statute 246402 4A and E1.
okay, we have, all given permission to move into executive session. We're going to take a break. It's 8:34, and we will be back soon.
Let the meat cake, or us eat.